This week on BSD Now, we've got some voting news for you, and no, not that election. We also have a closer look at kernel module creation, Bhyve, Lumina, CTL, and much more. So stick around for your place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 165, Vote4BSD, recorded October 26, 2016. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you with us this week. We got an exciting episode, lots of news to talk about, and of course, we were just talking about it before the show, but Meet BSD is just around the corner. We only got a couple weeks left before that happens. So next week we'll be doing a double episode, so we make sure we leave you something good to watch while we're out of town. And hopefully, you can actually come out and see us in person. I think you'll have more fun at Meet BSD, but I understand, travel being what it is, it's not like it's possible for everybody to get down there. But either way, I'm sure that will be a good time, and we'll have a lot to talk about when we get back. Yes. But just wanted to remind you still have a couple weeks left. So if you're in the area and are thinking about going, well, stop thinking about it and get your tickets and just be done with it. So we would love to see you there. Okay, Alan, so what do we got here? We got some news to get right into. So I mentioned in the title here, we're calling it a Vote for BSD. So what's this first story about?
So Isaac Levy, or Ike, who we interviewed back when we were in Tokyo earlier this year, is posted up over at the Nicebug emailing list that he's running for Aaron's advisory council. So that's the I forget what Aaron stands for now.
Yeah, what's the acronym on that? Let me look it up while you read.
It's basically they assign IP addresses. It's Registry of American Registry of Internet Numbers.
For Internet Numbers.
Yeah. They're responsible for allocating IPv4 addresses in North America and so on. And they have a 15-person advisory council that basically provides input from the people that use IP addresses, mostly ISPs and so on how they should develop policies and so on. So anyway, he was at the Aaron 38 conference, and while meeting with people there and so on, he was very interested in the discussions about, live internet policy issues and all that kind of thing. And so he's decided to stand in their election. So his goal is to represent the entire BSD community at this important body that makes decisions about how IP addresses are allocated and managed and so on. Trying to get people to transition to V6, but also allocating the small amount of V4 that's left, and maybe trying to reclaim some of the unused V4 to, relieve that shortage in the short term and so on. So over on the Aaron site, they have candidate bios with some background information about each person, kind of their CV and so on, but also a bunch of specific questions that they ask each person and what their answer was. So you can, peruse that list and see what everybody's all the different candidates said about a bunch of different issues and so on. And then Ike's is in there as well. And then the elections, I guess, started earlier this week or late last week, but it closes this Friday. So if you were the point of contact for an Aaron NetBlock or for an AS number, if you just log into the Aaron online account thing, then you'll have the ability to vote, and hopefully you can cast a vote for somebody to represent BSD on the Aaron Advisory Council.
I wonder how many of our listeners are the point of contact or have those credentials to be able to vote.
BSD is still very big in the ISP and the hosting industry, so I know I went and did mine this morning. So
okay, yeah. Sadly, I don't have one. Boo. It's okay. I don't need another thing to do. No thanks.
But
sorry.
Interestingly, if elected, Ike will be looking for more input from the community about what issues the BSD people care about and so on. So we look forward to, if he does get elected, maybe at the next Nicebug meeting, there'll be some interesting discussion about what it is that the BSD community would like from what Aaron would do for us and so on.
Okay. Oh, very nice. Very nice. Well, we wish them all the luck with that, of course.
Yes.
Okay, so next up in the news here. So Dragonfly BSD has now become the latest BSD, of course, to join the growing LibreSSL family. So as we mentioned a few weeks back, they were in the process of wiring it up as a replacement for OpenSSL. Well, we have a link over to the Dragonfly Digest talking about one of the latest commits that mentions that now if you build the entire base, it's all LibreSSL all the time, everywhere. And with this latest commit, OpenSSL isn't even built at all. So they've officially switched over. So, of course, congratulations, and hopefully we see more BSDs, and frankly, we should see some Linuxes jump on the bandwagon, too. I think that would be a great thing for the project. But speaking of Dragonfly, we got a little bit of other news, so we have to pass our condolences on to Compat 4.3. Well, for Dragonfly anyway. It looks like we have a commit here which finally puts out to pasture the old Compat 4.3 support, which has been disabled by default in Dragonfly for almost 5 years now, so I don't know how many people still used it or cared.
I don't know how many people would still have binaries from BSD 4.3. That's, from the 80s, that they were trying to run on top of FreeBSD or Dragonfly and so on. Yep. Yes, as you said, probably not a huge loss.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people complain, but you never know. I remember when they got rid of floppy disks for the installer for FreeBSD. Then that one guy, no, I still need them. It happens.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I remember hearing stories about Freefall, the shell machine that all FreeBSD committers have access to, having some binaries used, I think, for part of the mailing list or something, that were compiled for FreeBSD 2 something, and nobody has the source code anymore. We just have this binary that we keep working.
Oh, man. That's crazy. Well, still, this is good to see. It's a nice little cleanup of their tree, removing more than 1,000 lines of code and some of the old cruft that was still lingering around from 4.3. So, we can just kind of put that in the dustbin of history. So I'll be curious to see if that, takes place in FreeBSD as well at some point. Or, I don't know, maybe more people would scream there. But either way, neat to see. Okay, here. So before we go to our next story real quick, we want to mention our first sponsor this week, which is going to be DigitalOcean. So the website for that, of course, is digitalocean.com. If you've been any kind of listener of the show, you've heard us talk about DigitalOcean for a while now, and me and Alan use it for various things. But of course, since they first came on board as a sponsor, a lot of cool things have happened. So they came on right around the time they started doing FreeBSD support. And that was a new exciting thing, right? FreeBSD droplets in the cloud. You could spin it up in under 60 seconds. So they're always doing all that. So that's fine. That hasn't changed. But they've added some cool new features. So now you can get like 11.0 release. You can get a droplet with ZFS under the hood.
Or UFS, yeah.
That's
but
right.
Also,
that's
to kind of go with ZFS, they have the block storage. So, each when you rent a VM from them, you get 20 or 30 or 40 gigs of SSD storage. And while that's great, sometimes you actually, if you're going to run, your backups or something, you want a lot of storage. And so they have this block storage where you can basically rent storage at whatever amount you need per gigabyte. So you can rent 10 gigabytes or 100 gigabytes or a terabyte, all the way up to 16 terabytes. And if you need more than that, you just create a second volume. So now if you imagine that with ZFS, so now you have a droplet with a decent amount of RAM, and then you have, a terabyte or more of space that you've allocated.
Keep growing a pool.
Yeah, well, the best part is because you pay per gigabyte, you can start smallish, and then you can always increase the size. Now, because of the nature of everything, you can't shrink it easily, but if you, so you can keep growing it as you need more space. If you ever need less, then add a new volume that's the smaller size, and then you can use ZFS replication to move all your data to the new one and then cancel the old one. And the other nice thing is,
it makes more sense to do like a UFS droplet with more RAM and then just set up a ZFS data set, or a pool separate using that.
Probably. Although you can do double ZFS, but you'll get. It probably makes more sense to save all the RAM for the bigger pool. Because the other thing you can do is you can move that between droplets. So if you decide to get rid of a droplet and get a bigger one or a different one or whatever, your block storage can just seamlessly move to a different VM. And, with ZFS, it's designed for that. So zpool exported on one and zpool imported on the other, and it's all good to go. So,
so you can almost do like an HA type thing, right? Where you take one VM down and import on the other.
Yeah. And, you could actually, if you decided that you started with UFS on the droplet, but decided you really wanted ZFS for the OS as well, you can just blow away the droplet, build a new one, and then import your pool. Or decide to go the other way.
That's really cool, though. It's just neat that they can do all that, right? And that they've really gone the extra mile to support FreeBSD, which is one of those things we've been waiting for providers to do for years. DigitalOcean's already there.
Yep.
So definitely we should be supporting them as well. So don't forget, when you go to that site, you create an account, use the coupon code FreeBSDNow. So if you're creating a brand new account and you haven't applied any other coupon codes, that'll give you your $10 credit, which is good for running, of course, the lowest NVM for a couple months, or maybe you want to spend it on a little higher NVM, etc. But don't forget that. That's how they know that you heard about it here. All right. Anything else you want to add to that, Alan?
Nope. We'll move on to the next story. So this is an interesting one. Abdali Kaltai, who's a master's student studying AI and robotics, and was lucky enough to participate in the Google Summer of Code with FreeBSD over the summer. He said it was an amazing community and very noob-friendly and helpful. But he's written a tutorial here on how to create your first kernel module. So I'm guessing he's going to maybe run FreeBSD on his robots. I don't know. But he needed to create a kernel module to add some functionality or whatever. And so he's covered the basic steps here. He says, I wanted to make a starting tutorial for people to write a simple module for the kernel before driving into anything more complicated. He says the kernel module...
I haven't done that. Have you written one yet, Alan?
No, I've never had to write one yet.
Huh.
He says the kernel module that will be working a simple event handler in the kernel. It basically has two parts. Excuse me. The event handler function and then the module declaration. And then obviously a third part would be the functionality of your module, but this one doesn't have that because it's just an example.
It's like a hello world.
Yeah. So the module event handler is the function that handles the different events for the module, like the module being loaded or unloaded and so on. So it actually walks through that, and you see the different events are the module being loaded, the module being unloaded, the system shutting down, and then there's a mod quiesce, which before the module is unloaded, the kernel says, hey, the user would like to unload the module, and to that event, you either clean up everything and start shutting down the module, or you return an error saying, sorry, this module is still in use. This is what prevents you from, say, unloading the ZFS module while you still have a zpool imported. Whereas it's like you have to stop using the module before you can shut it down. So that's why that one's important. But anyway, and then he says, now that you have the event handler functions ready, he kind of shows a simple example of dealing with, when you load it, you print hello world, and when you unload it, you print goodbye, basically. So now that we have the event handler function ready, we need to declare the module data T structure. And then we'll use that in the module declare macro and load it into the kernel. Basically, this module just has the module's name and a pointer to the event handler function that the kernel will call when there's an event. So it's basically just the name and then the pointer to that function that we just wrote. And he says, lastly, we need to declare the module using the declare module macro, which has the following structure. You basically declare module, the name, then that module data structure we just created, then a sub parameter and an order parameter. So the name is obviously the name of the module, which will be used in the sysinit call that identifies the module and allows other things to interact with it. The module T structure is the one we just created, which provides the callback for the event handler and so on. The sub parameter, he says, since we are using this as a driver, in his example is going to be creating a driver, we'll set the value to SI sub driver, which is the system startup interface. And we're saying that this particular module is the driver. And then the order allows you to decide whether a module should load in the beginning, in the middle, or the end of this other modules. And so he set it to middle for this example. Because that makes sense for a driver, because you might have other modules that will need to come after it that will use the driver. And then he provides the basic shell of a make file to compile it. Because it's using the bsd.kmod.mk, all you really have to do is define the name of the module and the list of source files, and it will just compile it. All the infrastructure is provided by the FreeBSD build system. And yeah.
Well, That's neat. We'll have to see what he does with it now. He's got to give us some little, hints at what they're using it for.
Yeah, so that's a fairly basic startup there, but hopefully eventually we'll see a slightly more in-depth example and actually start doing something with the module.
Yeah, how to hook into various kernel subsystems. Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, hopefully somebody finds that useful out there. If you've been wanting to build a kernel module, you have kind of a little guide now to get you started. Mm-hmm. So we wish you luck with that. Okay, so you looking for a little bit of your Bhyve fix today? Well, if so, we got Trent of IOHive fame has a little nice blog post written with a little detailed look at how to get Windows 10 up and running in Bhyve. So first of all, Trent gives us really a nice look back at how far we've come in really just a single year. I mean, just a year ago, we had just kind of the initial support for UEFI. It was just starting to be a thing. There was no VNC option. If you wanted to do anything, it was FreeBSD or another BSD in a serial console. Well, fast forward to today, and we have Windows 10 plus Bhyve plus VNC. It's all there and working. It's amazing the progress these guys have made. But he immediately jumps us into the good stuff, though, showing us what we're going to need to follow along. In his instance, he's running this tutorial on 12 current, but he said running on 11.0 release should work as well. And, of course, he does mention that before you start on this quest, you need to make sure to read the Bhyve handbook, specifically check that your CPU is supported. So if you're running something without the correct VT extensions, then your journey's going to end prematurely in sadness. So make sure you've made note of that.
It would need to be relatively old now.
Like at this point, it's getting harder and harder to find.
Core i7, like Core i series, this should be fine.
Yeah, but then, we'll read this story. Then that one guy with the old AMD processor will be trying it.
Right.
So we got to throw that caution out there. But of course, next up, he takes us through some of the prep work needed to get the box ready to run VMs. So, of course, loading the kernel modules, creating tap devices for networking and such are detailed. But if you're lazy like me, you're going to want to copy and paste his handy scripts, which automate the process for you. So you can just splat that on your box, run them, and you're pretty much prepped and ready to go. So, of course, once the system's all prepped, you'll need to install the Bhyve firmware package, which, of course, provides the UEFI firmware binaries, which allows you to do booting. And then you'll need to get your handy Windows 10 ISO. But from here, Trent's even gone a little bit above and beyond, providing us with handy scripts to do both the Bhyve startup as well as enabling VNC support over an SSH tunnel, since you don't want to necessarily expose that to the outside world. So that's very cool. But at that point, you're pretty much good to go. You fire up your VNC client. You should be greeted with the typical Windows, press any key to boot from CD message. And then at that point, you're doing a Windows installation, which no, he doesn't provide you instructions on how to use or install or even like running Windows. We'll leave that up to you. But, he's at least gotten you that far, and you can make with it what you will at that point. But definitely good stuff. And, of course, good job, Trent, providing that. I'm surprised he didn't show really more IOHive usage to do the same, but I think he wanted to show kind of a from-scratch way of doing this. So if you don't have any buy-in to IOHive or any other hypervisor management script or whatever, this is a pretty cool way to just see what Bhyve's doing exactly under the hood.
But he actually mentions a list of them here at the end. He's got Michael Dexter's VMRC, my old Bhyve UCL, which I really should clean up a little bit. It doesn't even know about UEFI and so on. And basically, I kind of stopped working on that project when I integrated a config file into Bhyve, but then Bhyve had so many changes with the UEFI stuff that it didn't work anymore, and so that patch kind of got thrown aside. But I should maybe look at fixing that up again. And then there's VM-Bhyve, Trent's IOHive, and a recent fork of that actually somebody who promised us an interview who will have to chase down with a pointy stick.
Chives.
Justin Holcomb's Chives. He says each uses a different method and technique to store and manage Bhyve virtual machines. All of them are great projects and definitely worth checking out.
Well, I also got to mention, he gave me a little call out at the end there. He said, I'd like to thank Chris Moore of the TrueOS project and Michael Dexter, iXsystems, for the work they put into the BSD community. So I appreciate that, Trent. That's cool. And hopefully we'll get to see you again in another future BSD conference.
Yeah, I know Dexter's who got me into Bhyve with his presentation at BSDCan. I think it was the very first presentation at my very first BSD conference.
Wow, that's a good one to go to, too. It's like such an exciting time.
Well,
all this
even
new,
back then,
stuff.
when I first started with Bhyve, as apparently user number 1, with Dexter being user number 0, you had to tell your machine to boot with less than the actual amount of RAM you had, and Bhyve would only take that RAM that the OS didn't have. So you'd hide half your RAM from the OS and tell Bhyve to use that. And it was all very static. there was like FreeBSD ISOs even needed patch to be able to work with it, and it was just, it was all kinds of terrible to use. Apparently, I was the first person to ever try it on a machine with more than 16 actual CPUs, and found some interesting problems there, and a bunch of things like that. But it's
I don't miss those days. It's a lot easier now.
Bhyve is quite nice now. I've done quite a few things with it over the years. Just never have as much free time to play with it as I would like.
I know, right? Same problem a lot of us run into. But thanks for writing the article, Trent, and hopefully that comes in handy for some folks who want to give the newer Bhyve features a whirl. Okay, we're heading over to the news roundup now, so we'll try and hit these stories a little quicker, but there's still a lot of good stuff to talk about, so hang with us. So first up, we have some news about Lumina. A new version of the Lumina desktop has landed. Version 1.1.0 brings with it some important fixes as well as some new utilities which will make your desktop computing easier than ever. So we'll hit some of the highlights here. So first up, all the translation or the internationalization files have been reworked. So instead of needing to install another package, they're now just built when you compile it with the with I18N flags set. So they just come right with the desktop. Another thing is a new handy start-lumina-desktop command has been added, which makes it easy to get Lumina running from, say, your login manager if you're not using the one built into TrueOS, or if you run things manually. If you're old school and want to put it into xinitrc, you can do that too. So, hey, don't knock it. Some people still do that. Of course, a bunch of internals have been reworked as well with how it tracks applications and start menu entries. They fixed some memory leaks that were found there, and they sped that up as a general I guess just a general speed up for the whole start menu system. Also, the default Insight file manager has been given an overhaul and includes some new features like Git support. So you can now tell it to check out or clone a Git repo, and it understands when you're in a Git directory, and you can click to show differences in files and whatnot. So it's kind of neat. It has some awareness of that.
Yeah. Also, I love that shell integration on my Windows machine with SVN, with Tortoise SVN.
Yeah. It is very nice. So that's pretty much what he's done here. So we have basically Git integration now, which is pretty slick. Also, a new Qt5 Lumina calculator has joined the family, which means you don't need to use kcalc or xcalc anymore. We have kind of a built-in one into Lumina. It doesn't suck in a lot more dependencies and looks pretty decent. Also, a nice TrueOS specific option has also landed. So on TrueOS, if you're running the later packages, specifically now when you go to log out or shut down or reboot the system, if there's system updates waiting to be installed at shutdown, Lumina is going to detect that and then prompt if you want to install them or if you want to skip them. So that'll be handy when you're on the road. You don't have to.
If I'm shutting down because it's the end of the dev summit and it's time to go for dinner, I don't want it to be installing updates.
Yeah. That's not the time to do updates, right? So now we have a convenient way to ask, like, do you want to do that now or do you want to skip it and do it later? So if you skip it, don't worry, everything's still cached and ready to go. And then the next time you shut down, you can apply it then. So we're not going to force you to do it. None of this Windows crap where it's like, I'm shutting down whether you like it or not, and we're doing an hour of updates now because that really sucks. So anyway, good stuff. That was a feature I really wanted. So glad to see that made it in. Okay, so I think that's about it for the Lumina stuff. So tell us about OpenBGPD. What's going on there?
Yeah, so OpenBGPD has gained support for an interesting new draft RFC called Large Communities. So back in the early days of the internet, when routers rode dinosaurs to work and nerds weren't cool, we wanted...
Wait, we're cool now? When did that happen?
We wanted to signal to our network neighbors certain information about routes. To be fair, we still do this, but back then everybody had a 16-bit AS number. So I meant, between 0 and 65,500 or 65535. But there was, so they had this concept of communities. So we were using a 32-bit value where the first 16 bits, the 32-bit value was split into two 16-bit values, and we were able to encode, us and them into that 32-bit number so that we could have these different communities. But 16 bits is pretty limiting. There could only be about 65,000 possible networks on the internet, and that's not enough anymore. So years ago, they created 32-bit AS numbers. So that allowed 4 billion unique networks. And considering at the time we only had 4 billion IP addresses, that seems like enough. However, they can't really encode 32-bit us and a 32-bit them into a single 32-bit value. That just doesn't work like that, right? So they invented this thing called extended communities. but it tries to solve everything except the case of a 32-bit AS number signaling a different 32-bit AS number. And, that's becoming the common case now, so that's not really helpful. So enter the new feature, large communities. This basically provides 3 32-bit values. The first one is the owner of the namespace. Normally you would put your own AS number there or the AS number you wish to signal. And the second 2 32-bit values are opaque. You can kind of use them for whatever you want. And only have meaning from the originating operator. But most people will do like my AS number and then, verb, noun, or whatever. So they have a community for each thing they're going to do, and then inside of that, a community for each one, the person they're going to do it to. Or some people prefer the other way around, have a list of all the targets and then what you're doing to them. But so Hessler says, having previously run a 32-bit AS number, it quickly became obvious that the lack of suitable communities was a critical problem. It was even a way to actually request an old-style 16-bit ASN from RIPE, which is the European version of ARIN. So instead of waiting until they ran completely out of the short numbers, they started giving out the long numbers, and then if you really needed a short one to be able to use communities or whatever, you could get that. But now they say even the ability to say do this to that ASN was really ugly, since you couldn't really communicate who the community was supposed to matter to because you didn't have long enough numbers. So anyways, it's clearly we, the internet community, screwed up in not addressing this need much earlier. So OpenBGPD and OpenBSD-current has support for large communities, and this should be available when OpenBSD 6.1 is released. I guess that'll be about 5 months from now. This is based partially on patches from Job Schneider, or Schneider. I can't pronounce Dutch names. But anyway.
And we have that problem a lot. Sorry about that, folks.
But anyway, it's interesting to see the new draft RFC options being available in the tools a lot of internet exchanges use that are based on BSD.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, very good stuff. Okay, it's time for our second sponsor this week, which now we're heading over to iXsystems. So the website for that, iXsystems.com/BSDNow, where again, the iX has been with us not quite since day one, but pretty darn close. I mean, it's been a long time.
What? September? It was a VBSD con. So it was late September or November of the year we started the show.
Sure.
So it was, only, I think it was like 12 or 15 episodes at the most.
Yeah. It's been good. I mean, iX has been really good to us, and of course, we love iX. I work there, so I'm a little partial to them. But Alan's a good customer of iX, and
I got
of course, we
2 new machines that arrived last week are sitting in my basement, and 4 more are on the way now.
What'd you order? A bunch of any transcoding machines?
New transcoding machines that have so. The old ones where we were transcoding with the special Intel CPU, and we're having driver problems with it. And we decided, screw that. We're going to go to NVIDIA because that just works much better. So we got so for the existing machines, we bought a GPU that worked, and we managed to actually wedge it into the case. The biggest problem was the SATA cables poked up into the fan. So we replaced the SATA cables with these 90-degree ones, right? The cable comes out the end instead of the side, basically. And so we managed to finagle cables to get them out of the way and sandwich these in there. But it was slightly problematic. So when we ordered new ones, because we needed more of them, iX managed to find a motherboard that Supermicro makes that's narrower than standard. It's not like ATX or whatever. And so the PCI ports hang off the side of the motherboard. So you can slot 2 cards in, but they don't overhang the motherboard at all. So on the old one, there was a riser that turned the port sideways, but half the motherboard's also underneath the GPU. In this one, there's nothing but case. So that it's got room for the 2 cards, and they're not overhanging the motherboard, so that you can actually fit 2 cards or 1 dual height card in a 1U case, which I didn't even know was possible.
That's pretty cool.
Plus, it has a half
more airflow. It has
a half height port on facing the other direction, so you can even get a 3rd card in there somehow.
Well, if you end up doing one like that, I want to see a picture.
We have one of them open downstairs. I'll have to take some pictures. But
see?
very nice.
Next week's episode.
And we got the those going. So we got the GPUs and dual 10 gig NIC, so that we can push a lot of video out. And yeah, they've been great. We're very much liking them.
That's fantastic. So if IX will treat Alan that well, that's not just a special deal. We don't have like the special Alan Jude hotline where he calls up and gets like the right people or whatever. I mean, that's your experience too.
No,
so if you call up and speak
send
to
them an
folks
email
at
and be
IX,
like, hey, this is the problem I'm having. Do you have any ideas? And like, well, we have this one. And I'm like, oh, that'll work perfectly. Yes. So build me one of those. And I try it out and it's all great. And I'm like, okay, I'll get me a bunch more of those. But this time, I don't need 10 gig NICs on all of them, just the two that I already have. So the next 4, we'll just go with the dual onboard gigabit that come with it. We don't need to add the extra add-on card. But
sure. But still, that's awesome. And of course, IX can build the latest and greatest stuff with the latest and greatest Intel processors. So if you need a specific revision or model, or in Alan's case, a special motherboard.
Well, the other thing I wanted is, unlike the older ones that we have where we had to go with an E3 to get the built-in video card, this time I needed more horsepower. So I actually managed to get an E5 2630 V4, the latest one. So it's actually 10 cores. So with hyper-threading, that's 20 cores. In a little 1U machine.
That's nice.
That's amazing.
That's very nice. Yeah, that's amazing. So, of course, call them up today. Let them talk to you and figure out exactly what will work best in your particular situation. Tell them what you're trying to do with the machine so they know, they can give you really good recommendations. And like, actually, you want a better CPU, or no, you want to put more money into the RAM, or you're going to be doing a lot of storage. Well, IX specializes in that too. So again, get in touch with them, tell them what you're trying to solve, and then let them come up with a good custom solution for you.
That's the biggest thing is, well, it's great if you already know what hardware you want. Just tell them what you want to do with it and see what hardware they come up with. And you might be surprised if it's actually something better than what you had.
That's right.
It's like, well, I thought I wanted this kind of SSD, but actually I wanted that kind of SSD.
Yeah. Like I would have made a mistake, but they stepped in and saved my bacon. And then, when they save your bacon, it makes you look good and your boss is happy and you get a raise or a bonus and, life goes on. It's good. So we can't promise that for everybody, but IX will definitely play its part in making your life a lot easier. Okay, so tell us about the new CTL high availability implementation that's happening in FreeBSD.
Right. So this is work actually that Alexander Moten did with iXsystems back in it was a while ago now, revision 287.
A couple years ago, I think.
It wasn't years ago yet.
Not that, I thought it was a little farther ago. I remember them talking about it internally.
It was committed in September of last year. So 13 months. I guess it's been a year already. So if you guys remember, before we've talked about the work of Mikhail Zakharov, who is working on this Beast storage appliance concept where you'd have dual controller heads controlling one shelf full of disks and being able to fail over between them and so on. And so now that he's had some time to play with CTL, he's switching his design over to using that instead of what it was doing before, where he had a custom-built arbitrator instead of using a built-in feature. Because when he started this work, CTL didn't exist, or CTL HA didn't exist. So he says, so this is a follow-up to his original design that we're switching it over to using FreeBSD 11 and this CTL HA implementation. He says, this enhancement looks extremely important for the Beast storage system as implementation of a high availability ALUA in FreeBSD can potentially replace Beast's arbitrator mechanism, which is completely described in the original Beast project page. So ALUA in storage world terminology means asymmetric logical unit assignment. In simple words, this is a set of techniques which allow a host to access any LUN via both controllers at the same of a storage system. So, you have one sled full of disks and you have two different controllers, so each one shows up twice, basically.
Sure.
So it's, as I still do not have any real hardware drive enclosures, he's currently using VirtualBox and the iSCSI protocol to test this. He says, I've already deployed this environment for the Beast development, so we can use a similar, yet more simplified template for testing the CTL HA. So I added a note here, especially I talked to Mikhail about doing an interview, And he says, if anyone has access to hardware of this type, so basically a disk sled with 2 separate controller heads, SAS and so on, that they could actually let him borrow over SSH or whatever for a little while. That'd be very helpful to the development of this, because currently he's playing with VirtualBox and so on, doesn't have the real hardware.
Sure.
But it says, so in VirtualBox, we create 2 storage controllers, controller A and controller B, and a host, client 1. Then we create a virtual SAS drive as DA0, which is 256 megabytes and configured as shareable in the Virtual Media Manager in VirtualBox, and is simultaneously connected to both controller A and controller B. So the basic settings are applied to both controllers. This PDF kind of walks through all the settings and IP addresses and all that. But basically, we set it up, and then you set on each of the controllers, you set the HA ID. So controller 1 will be 1 and 2 will be 2. But then there's the HA mode. This configures the default role of the node. So on controller A, we set it to 0, which makes it the primary. And on controller B, we set it to 1, which makes it the secondary. He says the role also can be specified on a per LUN basis, which allows you to distribute LUNs over controllers evenly. So if you have, say, 32 disks in your sled, you can actually have 16 of them go from one controller and 16 of them where the primary is the other controller, so that in the default situation, you're going to break the traffic up between the 2 controllers to, say, get more network bandwidth out of it. He says, note that the HAAD and the HA mode are read-only parameters that can only be set at boot time via loader.conf.
Sure.
So you have to make sure you pick the mode correctly. So for the modes, there are 3 modes. Sorry, scroll past a little bit here. But there's active standby, which is where the primary node has direct access, has access to the disks, and the secondary node will only do basic LUN discovery and reservation. So you'll be able to see the LUN and connect to it, but you won't actually be able to use the LUN via the secondary until if the primary goes away, then the secondary will take over. This makes sure that the secondary doesn't try to use the disk while the primary is using it or whatever. And then with mode 1, you have active, where both nodes are directly connected to the disks. So you actually have the SAS connection that way. And while the secondary nodes synchronize with the primary one. So both can be used at the same time. But the secondary one is actually accessing the disks. In mode 2, which is also active, the primary node has access to the physical disks, and the secondary node forwards any requests you make to it onto the primary one, which then writes it to the disks. And this, prevents the disks being worked by both ends at the same time.
Sure.
So anyway, then you configure it, and you set the HA_peer variable, and basically you tell it, connect to this other host, and it will make the connection. And when you do, you'll see some log messages. First, the HA link state will change from 0 to 1, which is configured but not established. And then it'll change from 1 to 2, where it's actually established and the 2 HA nodes are talking to each other, and you can start using your disks. Then he sets up CTLD to export dev DA0 from controller 1 or controller A and B. Then on the client, he boots that up and uses iXsystems to connect those. So now on your client, you have a DA0 and a DA1. Each are actually the same disk, but we'll get to that in a second. He says, make sure you set the kern.iSCSI.fail on disconnect on the client, because normally what the iSCSI will do is it'll keep the device around and queue up anything you're doing, and then when it reconnects, it'll send it. But because we're doing HA, we actually want it to delete DA1 if it goes away, so that we can do the next thing. So we see here, as we know that DA0 and DA1 on the client side are actually the same physical drive, we put them together under multipath. So we use gmultipath create and give it the 2 disks, and this creates a new virtual device backed by those 2 different paths to the physical disk by controller A and controller B. And that's why we want, DA1 to go away if the secondary goes down, so that multipath will just use the other one rather than the writes getting queued up and not actually happening. So the document shows they set up basically copying a file in a while loop to create constant traffic going across the network to the disks. And then because multipath is configured in active-active mode as well here, we actually see traffic being split and half the traffic going to each of the two controllers.
Nice.
Then the secondary controller is turned off. So he just shuts it down, and we watch iSCSI disconnect that path, so DA1 goes away, G multipath adapts, and starts sending all the traffic over the primary path. So that so far works. So then we bring the secondary back up and get everything running and splitting traffic again, and take the primary down. But interestingly, all the traffic stops, and nothing's being written to the disk anymore. So the console on the client is filled with errors saying, logical unit not accessible, asymmetric access state transition. When he looked it up in the CTL man page, it explains, if there is no primary node, all nodes are secondary, or the secondary has no connection to the primary, then the secondary nodes report transitioning state. Right? So, therefore, it looks like a normal behavior for the CTL HA cluster in the case of a disaster. This is in particular so that if a secondary loses its connection to the primary,
has nowhere to forward the traffic
right,
to.
well, in particular, you don't want to get in a split brain situation where two different machines both think they're the master. And so if you're not actually sure that the primary is down when you're the secondary, you don't want to just promote yourself to the primary and cause problems.
Sure.
And so he says, it also means that a very lucky administrator can restore the failed primary before the timeout actually elapses and just continue. But if the primary is down, the secondary needs to be promoted by some other process. So you have your own mediator thing, or you can use carp maybe, or something like that. But anyway, if you set the kern.cam.ctl.ha role equals 0 on the secondary, promoting it to the primary, then the traffic will flow again and your disk will continue to work.
Sure.
So basically, the CTL HA doesn't do that part for you because it can't, protect itself from a split.
You need some other
situation.
means of making that determination. Somebody else has to play traffic cop.
Right. In particular, you probably want to do some extra checking to make sure that the primary is actually gone and not you're not in like a split brain situation. So you want to make sure that the switch is actually working and everything before you decide to promote yourself. And then the traffic flows again. But it'll be very interesting to look at this feature and what people start doing with it, because it does look quite interesting to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of neat applications you could potentially have with that. Okay, so next up we have some talk about SPF with our good buddy Peter Handstein. So tell us about what he's talking about. I'm not a mail guy, so that's why I let you write the notes for this one.
So he notes. So he has some interesting questions here. He says, the Sender Policy Framework, or SPF, is unloved by some because it conflicts with the long-established SMTP email use case, but it also is just too hard to understand and use correct. He asks if it's too hard to understand and use correctly for application developers in particular. So he's got a kind of interesting story when he was trying to file his Norwegian taxes, and he ran into a bug. So he says, he uses in Norway, you file your taxes on a website, and there's some SMS authentication stuff that happens. So, he was filing his taxes or whatever, and he gets an SMS back to his phone, except for it lists the due date for his tax payment as his birthday. So obviously some fields got munged around there, because instead of the due date, it has his birthday, which is obviously quite a ways in the past. So he tried to report the bug via the contact form on the tax authority's website. He says the report itself was fairly trivial. The SMS alert I had just received about an invoice for taxes due contained one date, which turned out to be my birth date rather than the invoice date. Not a major issue, but potentially confusing to the recipient until they log in and download the PDF and see the actual due date.
Sure.
But after he filled out the form and submitted it, he saw a bounce message on his email server. It said that support at altin.no, SMTP error from remote mail server after received, host mx.isp.as2116.net is not authorized to send mail for BSD or beastly.net. Which means that somebody somewhere tried to send a message to support.alton.no, but the message could not be delivered because the sending machine wasn't allowed via SPF to send domain for Peter's domain or send email for Peter's domain. So he says it's actually quite clear what happened here. That the
host mail server.
Yeah. So the website that he submitted the contact form from sent an email, but with a from address of Peter's email address. Instead of doing the right thing, which is having from some email address they actually control and have SFP records for, like support@alton.no, and setting the reply to Peter's address. This way, the reason they set the from is so that they can reply to the email and say, and answer his question. But they should have set the reply to and not the from, because now their email server is rejecting the messages that Peter is sending via their web form, because the web form is lying and saying it's an email from Peter and basically forging the from header, and the mail server is rejecting it. But basically, alton.no is rejecting mail from their own web form because their web form is configured incorrectly.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so then he spent a bunch of time trying to get in touch with them, including looking up the support contact for the whois for the domain and sending an email there, but that bounced too. Apparently, it didn't like the fact that he was sending email from a subdomain that didn't have an MX record and so on, which is still technically allowed. And so that... anyway, eventually he broke down and used his Gmail address to send him an email. And then... just recently, in October, so he sent this in August. In October, he finally got a reply. And they say, in Norwegian, which he translated, he says, the solution. It looks like you are using sender policy framework enabled on your mail server. It is a known weakness of our contact form that mail servers with SFP are not supported, or SPF. It's like, how can you just not support something that I think almost every domain uses? In particular, It's not going to work with any major like Gmail or anything like that either. So I don't know which email addresses would still work, but so this raises the obvious question: is SFP too complicated for developers to understand? I hope not. It's really quite simple. He says the obvious answer should be, and that everybody who's reading this will probably agree, the form's developer should place the user's address in the reply to field and send the message as its own valid local user. That would solve this problem. But yes, and he says...
that's too much to ask.
Yeah. And then he goes on to worry about, just how afraid should we be then of these same developers when they do battle with specifications like DKIM and DMARC, where, you're actually cryptographically signing the emails.
No. Yeah, that's probably maybe years away. They'll even look at that.
I don't know. Gmail and so on are starting to require that to not end up in the spam folder. So,
well, interesting to see. Well, hopefully he'll get a response from them in the next couple of years, telling him why they can't do those next.
Yeah, seems like it should be fairly simple to set the from address to something valid and then just set the reply to, but.
Would have taken them less time just to do that than to actually wait and send them a response on why it wasn't supported.
Yeah, although it's fairly obvious from the response that they don't really understand what's happening there.
Okay, time for Beastie Bits, folks. So we're going to hop right into these. So first up, we have a post here at the mailing list. Looks like somebody's looking for a very part-time sysadmin to help at a small internal platform. Specifically, they're a U.S. company and needs some help doing some DNS and email, and they're looking for a long-term relationship with someone they could throw some work at. Typically billed by project scope is what it says here. So they gave an example of they need a new auth DNS server set up, so base install, root password, go configure bind, blah, 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 do security tweaks, set up a new mail server, virtual host, etc. So anyway, if that's something that interests you, we have the link in the notes here. Go ahead and take a look at that, and you'll find the email address of the poster.
Yeah, in particular, they say it's nothing very time critical, so they're very flexible about schedule and so on. So I know there's quite a few kind of consultant type people around who be looking to pick up extra work that doesn't have, very intense scheduling requirements or anything like that.
So good stuff. Anyway, we wanted to pass that along. Next up, we have a Twitter post here about if anybody wants to build the latest Node.js on OpenBSD, there's a patch included. So I imagine they're looking for folks to give that a whirl and let them know what works and what doesn't. Okay, so what's this next one here? IBM's looking at donating some Power 8 servers to OpenBSD. Do they have some requirements on that or something they're looking to have happen before they donate, or are they just considering
This is an email from Mikhail who asked IBM to donate these to the OpenBSD Foundation for adding support for their Arch. After 6 months, they got all the way to their director of the Power ecosystem. And he says, it would be helpful to know where you are seeing requests for OpenBSD on Power architecture and what applications on top of OpenBSD are being requested. We have not seen any requests as of yet from our target clients. So if you have any interest in running OpenBSD on a Power 8, IBM would like to know what kind of applications you're going to be running and so on, so they can decide to support
doing with it. That's right.
So he says, can you please collect, they asked Mikhail to collect these answers and post them in a thread or send them to him, and he'll forward the responses on to IBM, and hopefully they'll decide to donate some Power 8 machines to OpenBSD. I think FreeBSD has 1 or 2 of them. But yes, there's some work going on to get those brought up as well. But yes, it'd be definitely interesting to know what people are interested in there in particular.
Yeah, we'll have to see if there's a follow-up to that in another week or so, see what turned up. Okay, so now we have a link here, it looks like, to a bunch of Ansible scripts, which will help you configure a new DNS server running on FreeBSD. So we'll have a link to that. It's over in Ansible's Galaxy subdomain and under FreeBSD DNS. So take a look at that. If you're an Ansible user, this may come in very handy for you. And to round up the Beastie bits, I think there's a new Bhyve vulnerability you had to mention, right, Alan?
Yes. So this came out yesterday, and it says, an unchecked array reference in the VGA device emulation code could potentially allow guests access to the heap of the Bhyve process. Since the Bhyve process is running as root, this may allow guests to obtain control of the host. I'm not sure that's how much work that would take, but obviously a problem.
It's enough that they need to patch it.
For Bhyve virtual machines with the FBuff frame buffer device configured, if exploited, a malicious guest could obtain full access to not just the host system, but other virtual machines running on the system. So this is, if you're using the FBuff device, then your Bhyve is vulnerable and you should patch it. The patch is available here as FreeBSD 11-P2. This only affects FreeBSD 11 because that code is new enough that it's not in 10.3. He says there's no workaround available. However, systems not using Bhyve for virtualization are obviously not vulnerable. And additionally, systems using Bhyve but without the FBuff frame buffer device are not vulnerable. So if you're still using Bhyve in an older mode where you're just using serial or whatever, as long as you don't have the FBuff device in your invocation of Bhyve, then you're okay. But either way, you probably want to patch up. There were some other vulnerabilities that came out as well, but this is actually the first one for Bhyve.
Hey, it's big enough to have vulnerabilities now. That's kind of a milestone of sorts.
VGA emulation is something complicated enough where that could happen.
Yeah, okay. Well, good stuff. Well, of course, we'll keep you abreast of anything else that pops up in the future.
But just interesting to see security companies actually looking at Bhyve like that.
Yeah, people are starting to implement it places, and they need these security advisories to come out right away. Okay, so we got feedback and questions to get to, but really quick before we do that, we have our last sponsor this week, which is going to be Tarsnap, of course. The website for that is tarsnap.com/BSDNow. I know Alan and I have been using Tarsnap for quite a while now. I think I've still only put money into it one time.
Yep. I put my money in January of 2015 to finally meet my New Year's resolution to back up my stuff, and it's been running happily ever since.
Yeah, same here. It's like I think I put $25 in. Last I checked, it was still like 19 or something.
Yes, I think I put just 20 in, and I'll be good well into like 2025.
Yeah, it's really cheap, folks. Especially if you're backing up, easily duplicatable data that's not changing a lot. It's only going to back up the bits that have changed. But the really piece de resistance of Tarsnap is just that it does everything encrypted, right? And that's why me and Alan can trust it. Number one, we actually know Colin, the author of it. We get to meet him. He's always hanging out at the BSD CAN conferences. I think he comes out to some of the other ones too. I want to say he came out to VBSD last time around.
I don't remember.
I'm pretty sure it was there.
Yes,
but anyway, he's always around. Good guy. And
but the important thing is
math whiz that we trust what he does.
Because he's the crazy math whiz and so on, and formerly the FreeBSD security officer, he doesn't want you to trust him. He actually has a blog post he did a couple of years ago about why you shouldn't trust him. But in particular, he designed Tarsnap in such a way that you can see that you don't need to trust him. Right, you can.
Well, that's
the client
the kind
code
of trust
is
you
open.
have. We trust it because we don't have to trust it.
Exactly.
In other words,
because there's no assumption that we trust anything. You can the source code for the client is available. You can look at it and watch that it actually encrypts all your data with your key. Your key is never transmitted anywhere, and then only the encrypted version ever goes out to the internet. And so, if you decide that you don't want the copies on the internet to exist anymore, you just shred that copy of the key. And now there's no way
that data is meaningless.
Anyone could ever decrypt your data. And, now it's safely deleted from the cloud where, there's really no other way to delete stuff from the cloud because you don't know how many backups and replicas and so on that your random cloud providers are making. And so it's the only way to be sure.
It's the only way to be sure. And of course, they kind of put their money where their mouth is too, because the source code's been released as well. So don't just take their word for it. Actually go verify it does what it says it claims to do. And of course, they've even had bug bounties. So if you find a bug or whatever, Colin's willing to even pay out cash to help get those things fixed. And I don't think there's been anything recent that's popped up either. So it's been quite a while. But definitely good stuff. And we encourage you to get signed up today. Okay, so let's go to our first questions here. So we actually have two from the same person. Larry wrote in, and he starts off, he had a question. He says, "Hi, Alan and Chris and everyone. I've attempted to install vanilla FreeBSD 12 kernel on my laptop, and upon successfully installing and rebooting, I tried to run package update. Instead of performing as expected, I got a user lib package error, undefined variable dir name." He said, "I love BSD, but I've never run into this error before, and I can't seem to figure out a fix. Any help would be much appreciated. I am a longtime listener and love the show."
So I mentioned it was actually undefined function or something, not variable, but anyway.
Yeah. But what it boiled down to was, and Alan responded to him via email, but I've seen this error crop up often enough with TrueOS and other people running current as well that I wanted to highlight it. So if you're running current and you're on a rolling release, when you go download packages and package has to bootstrap itself, for example, it's possible you're on one version of the base, which is older, and then you'll get a package which was built on a newer version of the base, which has a different ABI, and that's when you'll run into these undefined errors. So typically the way you fix that is you'll want to run the package static binary, which is statically compiled, and use that to bootstrap yourself, get past this error, and get up to a current set of packages. So if you're on vanilla FreeBSD 12 current, they're not doing package base there, so I imagine you'll have to do a source upgrade if that's probably the only way you can get up to a more current base before you install packages. So I do the source upgrade first. If you're on TrueOS, you can do the package static space upgrade space -F to do a forcible reinstall of everything, which will include the base system since we use package base. So that's one way you can solve the problem on TrueOS.
Yeah, in general, it's just in particular the dir name and I think it's base name. Anyway, two of the functions in libc were changed to work slightly differently, and so if you have a package compiled to work one way and a kernel compiled to work a different way, when they don't match up, you run into this problem, and then you just have to get them back in sync.
Correct. So we've added some glue to TrueOS to try and prevent this kind of foot shooting from occurring in the future. But if you're on older TrueOS, you may still see it if you haven't got that new glue yet. So that would be the way out of it. And I've had to tell many people how to do that.
In particular, when you're upgrading from one major version to another, even if package still works, the first thing it tells you to do is actually run package-static install -f package to forcibly reinstall PKG so you have a version of PKG compiled for, say, FreeBSD 11 instead of 10.3.
Sure. That's right.
Because you can run into a lot of the same issues. Also, obviously, when upgrading from 10.3 to 11, you're most likely to see the error be the version of SSL you have not liking. So package 10.3 is looking for an old version of OpenSSL, and 11 only provides the newer version, and so you get this error message. So very common thing. But package-static is there for a reason. Yeah. I sometimes wonder why we didn't just do it.
Free card.
Why we didn't just always just use that. But I guess.
Well, so all of our internal scripts for TrueOS do that now. Like everything just runs package static because it's the only way to be sure, right? If you've gotten in this sideways situation.
I guess it comes down to like memory footprint and performance and a couple other things is the reason why there even is a dynamic package.
Okay, so then Larry followed up, I think, a day or two later, but he sent us another email again. Hey, Chris, Alan, everyone. I've been using Nix on my computers exclusively since 2002. I started off using Linux and quickly began to enjoy all the benefits of FOSS software. In 2013, I started watching your show and was quickly bit by the BSD bug. I took the dive and started using PCBSD 9.2. I very quickly fell in love with it. The file system structure absolutely made sense. The software didn't blow up every 30 seconds for one reason or another, and ZFS, which is enough said. He said, unfortunately, my Atheros Wi-Fi card that I had was notoriously bad, not just on BSD, but on Linux and Windows as well, and I had to go back to Linux while attending school. When I purchased a new laptop at the beginning of the year, I was excited to try out the hardware and see if it was compatible with PCBSD. I was depressed to find out the Wi-Fi was not supported out of box. After doing some research and finding out that PCBSD had switched to TrueOS, I quickly downloaded the USB image and went to work. To my surprise, it just worked. I'm also excited to hear that TrueOS is now on current. That's actually why we do that now.
Yes,
so you have things like drivers. Yes, because you can't wait a couple years for those. You need them now. So he said, now that I have BSD back, I will never be leaving again. Linux cannot offer me what FreeBSD can, and Systemd should never come into existence. Thanks for an amazing show, and thank you, Chris, for making an amazing operating system. Well, I can't take all the credit. There's a lot of folks here who work on TrueOS, from Ken, my brother, to Joe Maloney here, who's in our IX office in Tennessee, and of course a bunch of folks online as well. So it's a group effort, but we're really glad it's working for you. Okay, you want to read the next one here, Alan?
It's actually
it was funny. His name's actually, yeah, that's right.
I'll have it. It's a nice short one. So this is from Jason. He says, "Hi guys, I'm a physician who is a simple Linux BSD hobbyist." He says he wishes he was as smart as us. A few years ago, I had used PCBSD and enjoyed it, but things got a little clunky on my Lenovo W520 laptop, and he bailed to Linux. He decided to give your OS another shot and installed the new TrueOS, and he's loving it. Really enjoying Lumina and the new arrangements. Thank you, Chris and Ken, and everyone else involved. Great job. A happy TrueOS user.
Thanks. Well, we again appreciate that. Funny aside, when I was typing up the emails, I kept typing his name as Jason. And you can tell what I've been working on a lot of recently.
Yeah. Somebody's going to name their kid that at some point.
I wouldn't be surprised if somebody already hasn't. Little Jason. Okay. Anyway. You want to grab the next one too, Alan? Sure. This is the long one. He had some crazy ZFS problems.
Yes. So Matthias writes in about ZFS help. Hi there. This is a question for Alan, aka the Wizard of ZFS, and probably not very interesting to the show, but
it's very interesting. You broke ZFS. Yeah. We want to hear about this.
I'm not really sure whether this is appropriate or not, but don't bother, or don't worry if you don't feel like answering. Anyway, he says, so he just messed up his laptop's root pool. He has a backup of the important data, though there's quite a few scripts and config files that would save me time if I could get them back. But mostly I would like to see whether this can be mended and if I can learn from it. So I guess metadata is easier corrupted than mended. I was bothered by the name of the root pool, which is called sys. That bit me in a couple of times when he was working with the base data set on his boot environments. And it's not standard, though unlikely. Anyway, so he's having some trouble. So he booted into MFS-BSD 10.3 and did a zpool import and renamed his pool to tank. Then he renamed his boot sub-data set to root so it would work with badmin. Then he checked his bootfs and make sure that it had done the right thing. Because internally ZFS is actually tracking it by the GUID of the file system, it follows the rename and you won't have any trouble there. So then he did his ZFS list, and it showed his data sets and everything where he expected them to be. So he exported it, imported it as tank, and everything seemed okay. So he rebooted, and everything seemed to be okay, even up to mounting the data sets. and some installed apps were failing, like EasyJail and so on. So he rebooted into MFS-BSD again and tried to go back and rename his pool back to sys. There, the system told me there were 2 seconds of changes lost irretrievably, but I should be okay with zpool import minus F. He did that, not really thinking quite right anymore, but he didn't actually specify alt root, apparently. Anyway, when he was trying to import the pool by tank or by the ID, he's getting a warning, Solaris warning, can't open object some number, error 5. ZFS file system is version 5, pool is version 5000. He says zpool status returns no error, state online, but he says a fat lot of good that's doing me. He says, I've seen a few things online I might try, but I'm not doing anything until I receive on Wednesday an exact copy of this hard drive and byte to byte for everything so he can try a couple things on it first. Then he asks, should I use DD for that or some other thing to make an exact duplicate of the drive? DD on the raw device will work, so that's probably your best bet. Just make sure you specify your block size as something like 1 megabyte, otherwise it will take forever. So I'm not entirely sure what he could have done or how he ended up losing 2 seconds worth of changes irretrievably. Because everything he did seems perfectly normal, although I'm not sure why he had...
Did he forcibly shut down or something before it had a chance to flush or something?
Should have been happy about it.
Yeah, should have been happy.
I've had my system crash or whatever plenty of times. ZFS has never had any trouble. And then specifically about metadata, ZFS keeps 3 copies of all metadata, all important pool-wide metadata, and at least 2 copies of any other metadata, so that, if something like this were to happen, it would most likely only take out one of the copies, and it would be, fine. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the problem is. But yes, he's definitely taking the right approach in getting a second hard drive, copying all the data to that, and doing all his experimenting on that, rather than the original one, just in case. That way, if he does, for example, some of the later zpool import options, when you really force it with like minus X or whatever, can be destructive to data. And so you definitely want to do that on the copy rather than the original, so that you don't mess up your original. I know that at BSDCan this year, there was a presentation about improving the recovery options of zpool import, and generally being able to import more reliably and around more problems instead of just giving up too easy.
Failing out. Sure.
So that might be worth looking at as well. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Has any of that made it into head yet?
I don't think that's even made it into OpenZFS yet.
Okay, so it's still on the drawing board, so to speak.
Maybe it has landed recently. If not, it's definitely on the soon list. But it was presented at BSDCan if you want some background on what's going on there. And you might even be able to just email the person who gave the presentation, and they might be able to point you at like a live CD or something that you could try booting off of and importing using that. Because the nice thing about ZFS is that you can actually import that pool on, say, Illumos if it's got slightly newer ZFS that might be able to import it for you or something.
Cool.
But most likely all your data is probably still there. So we'll just have to look.
Well, we wish you luck with that. Hopefully you can get that sorted. Okay, so next up, Rob Roy writes in. He says, hey, Chris and Alan, it seems conventional on FreeBSD for account's primary group name to match the account name. In other words, ALF has a group name of ALF. He said, do either of you happen to know this convention's history or rationale? He said, I've checked on Scope and Server and OS X, and they use the default catch-all groups like group and staff instead. Thank you so much, Rob Roy. And he says he'll see us at MeetBSD. So I don't know the history of that, but now that you pointed it out, I do remember on OpenServer it was different. Like you didn't have a group name that matched your username. So I guess we'd have to ask an old timer.
In particular, MeetBSD might be a good place for that, because I think on top of the fact that there'll be a bunch of people like that there that would know, I think one of the unconference events we're actually having is Stump the Chump, where we will pick a couple of old timers and be able to throw questions like this at them.
Yeah, that would be a fantastic one to see if anybody even remembers, like who put that in, why, and what was the rationale behind it. Because, you're right. Definitely in other places, that's not the
The weirdest one I've ever seen with that, though, was at my college. They had each user was their student number. So, I was like 287 something. Anyway, I was like some 6-digit number. And then we all had a group, G, then that 6-digit number. But what was really interesting was our home directory, rather than being owned by, user : group, was owned by nobody : then your group. In particular, so that you, being not the owner, couldn't change the permissions on your home directory to allow anyone else to read it. So the permissions were actually like the owner, which is nobody, could only execute, so they could search into your directory, but nothing else. And then your group had full rewrite execute, and then everybody else had nothing. So that meant the web server could get in to find your public HTML directory, but that's it. But this way, you couldn't open up the permissions on your home directory to let your friend borrow your homework or something like that.
That's interesting.
It actually works. Thought about that. It's kind of interesting.
That works. Well, that's it. We're changing the TrueOS scheme now. That's what you get. No, actually, I wonder how many people that would piss
live off. Update. Anyway. Apparently, the person at Delphix working on the better zpool import stuff is Pavel. I forget his last name. He works at Delphix, and it's expected to land in Open ZFS in November. And so I expect like a week later, it'll be in FreeBSD. So hopefully before the end of the year, we'll have that. He wants to wait that long. Well, November is like 5 days away at this point. It depends on what they mean by November, I suppose. But
sure. After Thanksgiving, before first week, who knows? But anyway, good stuff. Well, hopefully we'll get you some help there, and that'll get resolved. Okay, so we're closing out the show for the day, folks. So, of course, we want to remind you, feedback at BSDNow.tv. That's your one thing you have to remember. If you want to get in touch with me and Alan, and you're not going to actually come out to a conference to talk in person, that's your way to do it. So send questions there if you have comments, show ideas, especially stories. If you find stories out there that sound really neat and you'd like to hear it talked about on the show, send it over to feedback at BSDNow.tv so we can make sure it gets into a future episode. Also, interviews. So if you're somebody who is working on a project or you know somebody who should come on the show and talk to us about it, again, drop us a line at feedback at BSDNow.tv so we can make that happen, get it scheduled, and we'll hopefully feature them in a future episode. Of course, again, reminding you, a couple weeks till Meet BSD. Try and make it out to there. We'll look forward to seeing you in person, and it's going to be a lot of fun. As I say, the birthplace of BSD,
the
campus at Berkeley. It's going to be good.
That'll be interesting.
It's going to be good. Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
They said, it's like Josh Petzel said last week, see who walks around with kind of hushed, hollowed tones. They go, I'm not worthy. We're not worthy. It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. And hopefully we'll see several of you guys out there.